And here is Lizzie Gottlieb and Robert Caro. I'll start with a question for you, Mr. Caro. You've been very generous in your book writing about your process and the way you work. Why were you reluctant to have a film made?
Why would I have elected?
No, why were you reluctant to have the film made?
Oh, why was I reluctant to have a film made? I generally never talk about my work. I don't like to talk about my process because then you start thinking about the process instead of the writing. I really only made the movie because I know, as her father says, I know industriousness when I see it, and I saw how hard Lizzie was working on it. That's really the reason I made it.
How hard was to get this going?
Sorry?
How hard was to get this going?
Oh, how hard was it to get it going, the film? Yeah. It was not a breeze. The idea for the film came to me. I heard Bob my father was given an award, and Bob presented the award, and he gave a speech about their working together. And it really kind of struck me like a lightning bolt the next morning. I thought, I have to do this. I have to make a film about their relationship. And I don't know why, I was completely convinced that it had to be. And I called my father and I said, I've got the best idea. This is what we're going to do. We're going to make a film. And he said, absolutely not. And a few weeks later, I tried again, and he said, I told you no. And I kept at it, and it was for a long time. And finally he said, well, you can call Bob Caro, but he's not going to do it. Passing the buck to you. And I did call Bob Caro with a lot of trepidation, and you were so gracious and lovely, and you said, no, thank you. And you said just what you said, that you don't speak about your process, and then you were incredibly generous and said you'd seen a film I had made and that you liked it and that I could come and talk to you. So I went to talk to Bob, and somehow in that conversation in your office, I remember you said, I've never seen a film about a writer and an editor, and I think it could mean something. I thought it was an act of generosity towards my father that you agreed, but I think you thought I would take 6 weeks or maybe 6 months and make this film and be done. And it was 7 years.
Well, it's a little like the books. It's a little like the books.
7 years seems to be the magic number. But it's, of course, also, I'm glad that it was made because it's about a world that soon isn't going to exist anymore. And you feel that the world, is changing, and the idea, there aren't that many writers who use typewriters anymore, maybe 3. And the idea of an editor putting all this time into a book, it was unusual when he started, when we started together, but now you feel it's about to vanish for good. And there's an exhibit of some of my stuff at the New York Historical Society, and high school teachers bring their kids up there. Every so often I put on a cap so no one will recognize me. I go up, and over again I hear someone saying, that must be a typewriter. And you realize they've never seen a typewriter.
You have this portion in the film about carbons, where you put... in your book, Working, there is a fantastic story about why it was carbons that led you to first materials for your research on Robert Moses.
Oh, yes, that's a very interesting story. So, of course, when I started on Robert, over the years, many writers had tried to write biographies, and they were always stopped by Robert Moses saying something like his public relations man, said to me, the commissioner, he always wanted to be called the commissioner will never talk to you, and his family will never talk to you, and his friends will never talk to you, and you'll never get to see his papers. But what happened, I started anyway, and after a period of time, I got a call from a woman who was a friend of mine, and she was the public relations woman at the Parks Department. And she had heard this story, and she said, you know what he forgot about? He forgot about the carbons. And of course, in those days, all the letters, every time you write a letter, a secretary made a carbon. And the carbons, when he left the Park Department, he forgot about them, and they were stored in the 79th Street boat basin. There's a number of underground storage areas, and the third one down is as a parking area for the sanitation department trucks. So she said, I know where they are, and I can get you a key. And she did get me a key, and I went down there, and you open the door, and there's bare light. You turn on a light bulb, and it's a huge empty garage space. There were no trucks in it at the time. And there against the far wall were 23 four-drawer file cabinets containing 40 years, the carbons of 40 years of his memos. So Einar and I, in those days, it was before Xerox machines. We had some sort of a rudimentary copying machine, and we would lug it down there every morning for months and months and go through all those papers.
This is why it was really hard to make this film, because how many incredible stories that we couldn't fit in.
You made, Mr. Caro, you made a major editorial decision on Lizzie's behalf by deciding that you were not going to appear together in the film, in the same shot until the very end. Why did you decide that? And Lizzie, how did you react?
Oh, it seemed like a challenge to make a film that Bob heard somebody say it's a buddy film. You know, I wanted to make a buddy film, but to have them not be in the same room as each other was a sort of ridiculous and irresistible challenge, I felt. And I really felt that we could do it, that they had enough to say about each other and about their work together that it would work. And I was so grateful that Bob let me eventually get in there.
Without the sound.
Without the sound. But I don't think we need the sound. I didn't think we needed the sound when that happened.
No, you didn't. No, you didn't. There are questions? Yeah.
no,
Mr. Caro, they want your answer. Why did you decide not to, you didn't want to appear in the same frame until the very end?
I didn't mind. I didn't want the sound to be on when we had one of our angry exchanges, because things are said by both of us that I'm sure we regret and that we don't want on film.
Okay, raise your hand. I'm going to open to the. There is a question.
That aspect of not having them both in the same frame kept a certain tension that you were kind of waiting for the end.
Okay.
You know, the scene at the end.
I'm so glad.
There's a question there. Yes. Hold on for the mic.
Hi, I wish I could shake your hand. I want to say also the documentary really works. Have you seen Straight Line Crazy at the Shed?
No, I haven't.
You must. You absolutely must. You have until the 8th. I'm not associated with it, but I saw it this week and then have the documentary this weekend. You must. You absolutely must. You never wrote a book about a woman, and I understand that, you know, women don't have as much power, but did you ever think about writing a book about a woman?
Well, I actually have. If I had enough time in my life, I'd like to write a biography of the woman who's a central figure in The Power Broker and teaches Robert Moses about power, Belle Moskowitz. It's very interesting to me that in this world where everybody is trying to write about women and the relationship to power, nobody even knows the name of Belle Moskowitz. In the 1920s, she was probably the most powerful woman in the United States. She was Al Smith's advisor. He was the pioneering governor of New York. And he never did anything without asking her opinion. She would sit in the corner. She was a sort of, if I can use the word, probably it's the wrong word, plump Jewish housewife who was sort of a political genius. And he met her. She was president of the Citizens Club of New York, and he was running for governor, and he was sitting next to her on the dais. And he looked out. He was an uneducated guy, Al Smith. He left school, and he was very aware that he was uneducated. He left school in the 5th grade. And this was a bunch of women in hats. And he said, "What do I say to a bunch of women like this?" And she looked at him, and all of a sudden this small woman was the tough woman that she was. And she said, "To this bunch of women, Governor, I talk exactly the same way you would talk to a bunch of men." And he got up and gave the same speech, and it worked. And he brought her into his cabinet. And no matter, he liked to have conferences with a whole bunch of Tammany chieftains there, and they'd go over it, but no matter what they decided, before he made a final decision, she would be sitting in the corner knitting like Madame Defarge. And he'd say, "What do you think of that, Mrs. M?" And it's her decision that was always final. So when we say, as Franklin Roosevelt said to Francis Perkins, "You know, Francis, 95% of everything we did in the New Deal, that we're doing in the New Deal, Al Smith did first in New York. It was Al Smith because of what Bell Moskowitz taught him."
A question there.
Thank you. Wonderful movie, and as a reader of your books, I'm very, very happy to be here and want to say thank you very much. I read, and I think it might have been in Working, that you insist upon going to Vietnam to finish the 5th novel.
Yes.
And did you ever make it there?
Not yet.
Okay. Did COVID interrupt it?
I'm sorry. Well, actually, we were about to go in the very month that COVID hit in China. That was now almost 3 years ago, and Ina and I are planning to go.
Oh,
in the minute I'm writing
I can't
another
wait
section.
to find out your reaction. But my question is, what will seeing Vietnam now, how will that inform the Lyndon Johnson era? And is it in any relation to what you did in West Texas?
Well, there are two questions. How will Vietnam inform? One thing that I really want to try to show is what it's like to fight in the jungle, because these American soldiers fighting the jungle is something, the more you read about it, the more you realize it's something completely foreign to anything that we know. To wake up in the morning with your entire body covered with 5-inch long leeches, that you don't feel during the night, that you can't. Fighting in the jungle is something I want to dramatize. So that's one thing that, and in relation to what he did in Texas, I don't know it has a relationship. It's sort of the opposite side of Lyndon Johnson.
Bob, can I just say, I think I can speak for all of us here. Please don't go and get 5-inch leeches in Vietnam. Very worried.
It always seemed particularly disgusting to me. Yeah.
Mr. Caro, Bob Gottlieb has a moment in the film when he talks about disillusionment. He says, I think that you start on a subject like Lyndon Johnson, and then you keep working on it and working, and at some point you find that you were more optimistic, and you find a moment where you get you might get disillusioned about what your subject is doing. Does that ever make you question the subject of the book, or not?
I'm not. You mean that I changed my mind?
When a subject disappoints you or does something does that question your commitment to his biography?
Yeah, well, that's a with it's different. Robert Moses and Lyndon Johnson were different people. With Johnson, you're both getting disappointed in him when you see how he's getting us into Vietnam and deceiving us and not telling anybody he's sending tens of thousands of men over there and saying he's not doing it, which went on for about 2.5 years. So you're constantly disappointed, but on the other hand, you're also awed by his compassion for people. When he was in college, he was very poor, and between his sophomore and junior year, in order to go on with earn enough money to continue college, he teaches school for a year down in what they called the Mexican school in a little town near the Mexican border called Catula, where he's teaching the sons and daughters of migrant workers. And one of them said, no teacher had ever cared about us before. This teacher cared. He thought it was important to them to learn to speak in English, so he would get really angry. If at recess, for example, he heard a boy yelling in Spanish through the open window, he'd run out and spank him on the spot. And if it was a girl, he'd tongue lash her, really yell at her. So one of the boys said years later, to have him as a teacher was like a blessing from heaven. And he was determined that the kids would have a debating team like the white kids have in sports. Had a hard time getting the school board to buy bats and balls. He had to drive the debating team all over Texas himself. So when he becomes Texas, you haven't read this yet because it's in the book I'm writing now. When he is giving his great voting rights speeches, he says, "We shall overcome. We have to overcome prejudice. It's not Negroes, but it's all of us." So his speechwriter is Dick Goodwin, and Dick Goodwin sort of asked him a question, which I can't quite get he died before he gave me the exact wording, but do you really mean this, or is this a politically advantageous thing for you to do? And Lyndon Johnson says to him, "Listen, when I was young, I taught these kids in Texas, and I swore that if I ever had the opportunity, I'd help them. Now I have the opportunity, and I mean to help them." So you are awed by his compassion. At the same time, you're awed by his cruelty that he sometimes exhibits to people. He's quite an unusual human being.
Here.
Thank you for the wonderful film. It's so exciting and inspiring to watch. Mr. Caro, I just wanted to thank you because I'm a historian today. I think in part because I read your books when I was a college student and was so enthralled and so moved by them. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
So I wanted to ask, I guess appropriately for a movie about a writer and an editor, you have a very specific way of dividing paragraphs. You'll do the very dramatic one-sentence paragraph, and then you're not afraid to let one go on for like more than a page. I think most people might do it almost more visually, just, that's probably where I should break it. So I wanted to hear your thoughts about paragraphing, if you might want to share that.
Well, I'll tell you her father's thoughts that I used too I used too many one-sentence paragraphs.
There.
Thank you so much. That was a wonderful document for all of us for history. Now that you had to edit take out a third of your first book, but you hadn't published anything yet. Is there any chance that could be put back?
Well, I get asked that a lot, and the answer is I don't know, because I don't know. When we were cutting this, if you saw it, it's such a huge mass of stuff, 350,000 words. So whole chapters were getting thrown out. In other cases, I would condense 7 pages into 1 page, so they'd be laying around the floor. at some point after the book was finished, someone at Knopf put that all the papers they found in your father's office, I guess, into boxes and sent them out to me. I didn't ever want to see them again. And so I put them into trunks, cedar-lined trunks, and they haven't been opened. And now I've given them to the New York Historical Society, which is supposed to be opening them actually in the next few months. If there are whole chapters in there, that could be published, maybe we will do something with them. But I really don't know.
You met Robert Gottlieb in the 1970 when you were working on the Robert Moses. Did you find another editor? Do you think that your writing path would have been different?
My writing? No, I don't think I don't think anything could change the way I write. I don't know. It's difficult to know what you mean by that. We have big fights, about things, but I don't think your father would say they're changing anything. It's different. The Power Broker is different from the Johnson books because, as your father said, we had to cut out stuff that neither one of us wanted to cut out. It was really hard. It was I remember the cutting of the Power Broker as being a terrible experience, really bad. The Johnson books, of course, Lizzie did not adequately go into our fights over the semicolon because one of Bob's, the reason I picked her father was I had these interviews with 4 editors, and he was talking about, when I went in to have lunch with him over a sandwich on his desk, I realized he was talking about editing, and you saw this on the screen, I believe. He was talking about editing in a way that no one else can talk about. His whole idea, that basic thing that he said at some point up there, that it's not the job of an editor to change what the writer is trying to do. That way tragedy lurks. What the editor has to do is figure out what the writer is trying to do and make it better. Well, that's quite a brilliant insight, and it's one that, as I talk to editors from time to time, not many of them have. So I don't think anything would ever have changed. When I give him a book, the shape of the book, the basic writing in it, I don't think changes, except perhaps we have fights over the word looms. But I don't think the shape of them changes. But if he thinks there's something that should be changed, he is not a person that if you say, no, I don't accept that, you're not going to go on to the next page. He's going to try to make you understand why he thinks it should be changed. So that's really, a lot of writers here in this room, I think probably, it's sort of invaluable because he makes you really think about why you're writing something the way you're writing it. And that, to me, is a great thing.
I thought I should just mention while we're talking about that there's somebody here tonight who has been intimately involved in every aspect of these books since day one, and that's Kathy Horrigan, who is...
Yes, Kathy, stand up for just a second. She's the managing editor of Knopf.
Kathy, you've been at Knopf since what year? Kathy's been at Knopf since 1963 when Alfred Knopf was the... Yeah. Amazing. Thank you so much for being in the film and for being here tonight.
And I
next to Kathy is the great Ina Caro.
Ina, stand up.
think we have time for one more here.
A little earlier, a gentleman mentioned a short book that you wrote, for you short, 200 pages.
Yes.
Working.
Yes.
It's a wonderful book about your process. And toward the beginning of that book, you tell a story. It's not an especially dramatic story, but I wonder if you could render it here. You're driving around with a politician, and you have the inside track as a journalist, and he's taking you to various polling places. And at one of them, there's a protest.
Oh.
And something happens to you that changes the course of your life. I wonder if you could just say something about that.
Well, yes, I will. You know, we all have moments when we learn something or realize something about ourselves, which we didn't realize before. So I knew I wanted to be a writer. I was a reporter for a newspaper in New Jersey, the New Brunswick Home News. And through a series of flukes, I became the speechwriter for the Middlesex County, that's New Brunswick, Democratic organization, which was not a highly moral organization. And the least moral of them all was a boss of this organization. And he sort of took a shine to me. And I would spend a lot of time with him. And on election day, he said I would ride around the polls with him. And I was sort of, enamored of him. I was sort of enamored of him. He was so tough and smart and was teaching me things I didn't know. So I thought there was something wonderful about him. And then we got this.
So sorry.
No problem. Well, maybe there is a problem. And the scene that this gentleman is talking about, the way things worked there, he'd drive from polling place to polling place, and at each one there'd be a police captain or lieutenant would come up to the car and say, if they were handling things, and they were all saying, no problem here, no problem here. And then we got to this one polling place, and they were herding a bunch of black, they were well-dressed. This was the 1950s. The police were herding them into a paddy wagon, a line of paddy wagons, 3 or 4 of them, quite rather roughly. They weren't doing anything, but the police were prodding them with their sticks. And the captain came up and said, we had some trouble here, but we're taking care of it. And the boss nodded approvingly, and we drove away. And as we drove away, I realized I didn't want to be in the car with him anymore. I wanted to be out with them. So at the next time the car stopped, I simply got out of the car without a word and left. I never saw him again, but it sort of changed my life. Yeah.
Okay, one more. There.
I had an unusual introduction to your work. I went on a silent retreat when I was 20 years old at a monastery in Elmira, New York, and we couldn't speak to the other people on the retreat. We couldn't speak to the monks. The monks didn't speak to each other, but for some reason, they could read aloud at every meal. So for 5 days, at every meal, I heard Brother Jerry read The Power Broker. And it was the best thing about the retreat. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
An ultimate compliment.
Okay, no, please go ahead.
I actually have 3 quick things I want to say. First, I just want to say thank you so much to Bob Caro for trusting me to make this film and doing it for all of these years. And we sold the film to Sony Pictures Classics, and it's coming out in theaters on December 30th, so please tell people and urge them to go. And lastly, my incredible producers, industrious, adorable producers, Jen Small and Joanne Nurnberg, have a small gift for everybody as you walk out the door. So I just want to make sure everybody gets one.
Okay, and with this we have to. I think Mr. Caro has a car picking him up, and so we've stopped end this and thank him so much, and thank Jen for Lizzie for the
you so
for the film, because it's really beautiful.